So I welcome everybody to the kickoff of the call for expression of interest for Estonian space cybersecurity in GSTP 2021. I am Karoli Khan, project manager at the Estonian Space Office, and today's event is organized in cooperation with the European Space Agency and their Technology Programs Office and the Estonian Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications. Today is actually the third time we are organizing an information event to introduce opportunities for developing space cybersecurity products and services in cooperation with the European Space Agency. The Estonian Space Office organized 2 calls for space cybersecurity ideas in 2020, but this year we have a different approach. The European Space Agency has very kindly defined 12 topics for Estonian entities, and you are invited to express your interest. And we will have an introduction of participants. I ask all of you to say maybe 1 sentence about yourself and your business. And then we will go on with an introduction from Paul Lias, who is head of space in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, who will introduce the Estonian Space Cybersecurity Initiative. And this will be followed by an introduction from the ESA Technology Programs Office. And then ESA's space cybersecurity experts will provide an overview of the suggested topics, and you will be able to ask any questions. So we can first start with an introduction. I have already introduced myself. So maybe the speakers would like to go first.
Shall I go first? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Noelia Peinado, and we work in the. There's a lot of echo. I don't know. Matthew, maybe you. So I'm Noelia Peinado. I think you already, several of you know me already because I was there in Estonia. I think it was 2019 already, but okay. So we still work in the GSTP program, and in particular leading the coordination of what we call the Element 1 for technology developments up to qualification. And I'm here also with Matthew. Maybe you can say a few words.
Thank you, Noelia. So yeah, my name is Matthew Bullock, and with Noelia, we're working on the TDE, the Technology Development Element in the GSTP, the General Support Technology Program, implementing roughly about, just to give you an idea, 250 new activities per year with the various member states, and Noelia give a short presentation on indeed looking forward to this call for interest and to dialogue with you afterwards. Okay. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Antonio Satlasis. I also work for ESA. I'm the head of the System Security Engineering section at Tech at ESA. Specialized cybersecurity, and I'm also looking forward to this program.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Marcus Wallum. I'm an Operations Data Systems Engineer in the Operations Directorate at ESOC, where I lead the R&D Center of Excellence on Cybersecurity for the Mission Data Systems Division.
Thank you, and we shall continue with the participants. If you could also say a few words.
Yes, hello. I'm Alvar Kural from Tallinn University of Technology, and I'm working with one ERACHER project that is about cybersecurity and maritime, and I'm just interested about cybersecurity and space. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Antti Tamm. I'm the director of Tartu Observatory of Tartu University. So Tartu Observatory is the largest public R&D institution dealing with space in Estonia.
Yes, hello everybody. My name is Artur Rüttman, and I'm coming from a company, Estonia Lab. Our company works on hardware self-health awareness, and so I'm interested with health awareness and real-time hardware monitoring could be leveraged somehow for improving the cybersecurity in space.
Hello, Martin Jussi, head of space activities in CGI Estonia, so Estonian branch of the international CGI group. We develop ground segment software systems and also Earth observation data applications. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, I'm Kertu Metsoja from Estonian Defence Industry Association, and I'm the Research and Development Advisor.
And I'm Tarmo Rannis, I'm the CEO of the Estonian Defence Industry Association, so largely I'm the front face of the company. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lauri Kimmel, I'm from SpaceX. I'm CTO and we are focusing on mission control side of the space as well as cybersecurity, and we just completed our first GSTP project for ESA together with our partners from CGI and Cybercraft.
Hello everybody, I am researcher at Tallinn Technical University, and I'm also developing public services that are based on Earth observation data. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marianne Meister. I'm the coordinator of Defense and Security Studies at the Tallinn University of Technology, Research Administration Office. But also I'm a panel member in NATO STOIST panel. So for me, all those topics are very interesting and they are all connected to defense as also NATO have defined the space as defense domain. Thanks.
Hello, very warm welcome to everybody. My name is Marika Popp and I'm the head of space solutions at Guardtime, which is a system engineering company working on data-centric cybersecurity solutions and heavily engaged in cryptography. Our main avenues of interest in this domain lie within the immutability and traceability of different space data, mainly related to Earth observation and space surveillance and tracking data solutions. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Marili. I'm representing Startup Estonia, which is a governmental institution with the aim to supercharge the Estonian startup ecosystem. My focus is on cybersecurity precisely. Very happy to be here.
So yes, Kratworks, we are building drones for firefighting. We are ESA incubative with this, and as I have heard some words about defense, we also have an Estonian Defense Ministry grant to develop reconnaissance drone that uses machine vision on board of the drone to look for interesting objects on the ground. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Rauno Gordon from Tallinn University of Technology. I've been leading the CubeSat project, the student satellite project in the university. Now we have 2 satellites, Koit and Hämarik, are in orbit and functioning. So thank you.
Hello everyone, this is Rosin from Phase Growth. We are a company that is part of the Copernicus Relays Network and the EO4GEO sectorial alliance for skills in the geospatial field. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Silver. I'm CEO of SpaceX. Lauri already introduced our company, but to your memory, then we are focused on the mission operations as well as the satellite simulations part, and have just finished successfully ESA GSTP initiative, like operation simulator for cyber active sites with CGI and Cybex Estonia. Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody, happy to be here. I'm Sven, head of operations for the ESA PIC Estonia. just looking out how I can support further the incubatees that I'm working with.
Hello, Umesh from Tartu Observatory. I'm a system engineer here at the Space Tech Department, and looking forward to hear all the opportunities that GSTP has to offer.
Hello, Urmas Kvell from Cybernetica. So today I'm representing our cybersecurity department and data privacy department. And our interest lies in practical application of multi-party computation technology and machine learning technology. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Victoria. So I'm supporting Noelia and Matthew in the GSTP program. So we'll just keeping the track of any actions that might come from this meeting.
Great. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
From my side, I'm Madis Võõras. I'm the head of Estonian Space Office by Enterprise Estonia, and we are taking care of this event with Caroline today.
Thank you, Madis, and thank you, everyone. Now, Paul Lias, Head of Space in the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Communications, has recorded a video for us since he is currently traveling. Please give me a moment until I can share this video with you.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for attending the info session for Estonian space cyber security missions. Today we are going to announce the new activities, as you have already seen from email that was sent by the Estonian Space Office. So this time we are doing it the other way around. Earlier we were asking or collecting new ideas from you, from our companies especially. But this time we are going to give you some ideas already ourselves to moderate the direction where we should go. And you are welcome to give us feedback about and express your interests, how to continue. To maybe talk more about the project itself, I'm going to share a slide with you. One moment. Yes. So this slide, most of you are familiar with. So it's a slide about Estonian cybersecurity missions and how the project itself is built up. We started in 2020 with the phase 1, where companies were asked to provide ideas how to build software applications for cybersecurity software validation in space, cybersecurity exercises, and the main focus was on industry. And the main idea of the missions is so that Estonian companies can find a place in the space cybersecurity sector, since it's a very growing market and Estonian companies are very well known for space cybersecurity applications. Then we were developing a tool how Estonian companies and universities can validate their technology also for the space sector. So in the first phase, we were focusing on just on applications, and the results were very positive. We have already one company or one consortium which has developed cybersecurity exercise for the space domain and has already used it several times. So it's already the results are very positive. And this time we want to go much further. So we want to see real software or application validation or technology validation on orbit. So ideas which are a combination of hardware and applications or software development are welcome. So our main idea would be to send payloads to space, and the payloads are connected to some kind of software or application validation on orbit, or the payload will be included in some of the cybersecurity exercises. And of course, the more this payload can be used for validation or for cybersecurity exercises, the better it is. So one of the targets of the Estonian cybersecurity missions is, of course, to validate Estonian technology so that it will be easier for Estonian companies to access new markets, but it's also to develop more consortiums inside Estonia, so that we will see Estonian companies working with each other, and also cooperation between industry and university. So, for example, university teams can develop space hardware as they have done it already before, and companies can use the hardware to develop or validate their applications for executing some cybersecurity exercises in space. And in the next phase, where we want to go in the next years, is of course our own satellite, which could be, say, this kind of orbital sandbox for space cybersecurity to really test different kind of scenarios, what can go wrong. But it's something where we want to go in the next year. So today you are not asked to really build a satellite, but think more about the application side, about the payloads, and how you could develop new applications, and how they and how you can make money with it. So if you are also giving us feedback what you want to do, or if you are writing a project in the end, then think about also the business aspects, and because we want to see projects that will not end with an ESA project, but they will continue. So how you can really develop a real product out of it, and how cooperation also with ESA, for example, could continue in the next years. So we want to see very, very strong projects with huge follow-up potential, and also strong Estonian consortiums. And of course, not only Estonian consortiums, but it depends now how it can be done, but also consortiums with outside Estonia, with other ESA member states who are subscribing to GSTP element FLY. So I think it's also something where I think our colleagues from ESA can maybe elaborate more how this kind of consortiums can be made. And as a next, I think it's all from my side, and our colleagues from ESA will explain more about the 12 ideas they have proposed. So they will explain more about in detail, and hopefully also answer some of your questions already today. So you can give us feedback. What are your specific interests? And some of the ideas don't require in-orbit validation, but today our main focus is still on in-orbit validation. So always think about it. So how can these ideas be connected to in-orbit validation? And it's also, I think, important to talk to each other what other companies or universities are planning. So maybe you can combine your activities. So there could be one payload in space, which is connected, for example, to 3 applications or cybersecurity exercises. So it's really up to you. So thank you, and I have a nice info session. And if you have any questions, then please contact me.
All right, thank you, Paul, for this recording. I hope you all were able to hear and see it. And now I would like to give the screen to the ESA Technology Programs Office to provide more practical information about participating in the call for expression of interest. So, Noelia, you are already sharing. Great.
Yeah. It is so you can see the screen, I guess, right? Okay.
Yes.
So I think the introduction from Paul was quite useful and I think quite in line with what we are going to present today. So my presentation is about a bit more what are going to be the conditions, the logistics of this call, because as he already explained, it's going to deviate a bit from what we did before for GSTP. And in this case, we are going to give you and have here with me our experts in cybersecurity. We are going to give you some topics that you can try to map and try to see if these are activities that you may consider for developing in the frame of the GSTP. So I'm not going to explain in full what is the GSTP because I think several of you have already seen all our schemes and let's say a type of mechanism that we have in the program in order to implement activities. But I will at least give you an indication of what are the main ones that we may use for the practical implementation of these activities. Okay. So let me see if I can go to the next slide. So this call is, as you know, organized by the Estonian Space Office, but is fully supported from ESA. And in fact, the topics are somehow elaborated by us. So what are we looking in this call? We are looking so that you show in which activities, in which topics of the ones that we are going to present to you, you have interest, and what we want to do at the end of the day is to do some technology developments. And as Paul mentioned, in some cases, we can even go to demonstrations, whether in orbit or on ground, in the specific area of cybersecurity. So the call is open today. Today is the kickoff. And we are going to give you 3 weeks to provide us with some information that we will further evaluate. So how you will receive a template, or maybe you have received it already to be filled from the Estonian Space Office. And basically what we are after, because you are going to see several, I would say, questions there, but what we are after is we want to understand what is your background and what are your capabilities of your company in cybersecurity and for space as well. And we want you to map yourself within the topics that we are going to provide, this list of topics. And we also want you to think a bit further, because as one of my colleagues will mention later, this list is not maybe is not complete. So we don't intend to provide you a complete list. So if there is any other topic that you should that you think that it should be considered, you are also allowed to present this additional idea or topic to be evaluated or to be discussed with us. Okay. So, and what we want is that for each idea, you may present 1 or maybe 2 or 3, We want that you give us already an indication on what is kind of an outline, a very brief outline, 1-2 pages, in where you can tell us what is the scope of your development, what will be the final application, what is the schedule and budget, and if you have in mind any potential partners or cooperation. And if you don't have anyone, but you think that cooperation will be needed, that will be also good to be provided. Some conditions that we put in the call. So we will require that the consortiums are led by Estonian companies, not by research institutions. However, they are very welcome to also participate in the consortium, because I see that there were a few universities represented here, and also Tartu, and they are welcome to participate, but we will encourage that the lead is taken by a company. So in previous scope, there have been already some activities in place, and the continuation of these activities is also could be also presented in this scope. And we are also looking to see what is your, let's say, engagement in these activities, and by that we mean, okay, we will be happy to see that the companies are willing to invest in these activities. So budget, there is no real limit or range, but we have to have our foot on the ground, and we have a limitation of budget also in the GSTP for Estonia, and it has to be in line, of course, of the scope that you are going to present. So for technology developments that are not going to be just as standard activities as we have up to now, the budget per idea should be in the order of 200, 300 kilo euros. This is what we find the right number. And the ideas that may go up to in-orbit demonstration or even on-ground demonstration, but to some cybersecurity experiments, we can even go higher in terms of the budget. Okay. What are the next steps? What should you do now? So you have to get your documents from the Estonian Space Office and study them and fill our templates with your ideas. Okay. Then what will happen? So these ideas or this information that you provide to us will be evaluated by the Estonian Space Office and also by us. And when we see that an idea could be is in the right direction, we may call you for a bilateral meeting. And in this bilateral meeting, what we want to do is to have further clarification. You can explain to us better the idea, and we can also provide you some orientation of how to, let's say, yes, orient the activity in the, let's say, to or target the activity a bit further. So these meetings could still happen beginning or the first week of July, also early in August and in September. And it depends also on, we will make ourselves available, but it also depends on the availability of the company. So this is the target, let's say, timing when we expect these meetings to happen. So the idea will be implemented in GSTP. In our program, we have several schemes, as I say at the beginning. And I will not spend much time on those, but just to give you as a reminder, because I think you have seen our GSTP presentation a few times already. Just as a reminder, we have 25 participating states in our program, and we do in the order of 200 activities per year. And we have 3 elements, and this is where one of these elements could be, the activities could be implemented. In particular, in element 1, which is dedicated to development of technologies up to qualification, as I said at the beginning, we have 2 specific frameworks that could be the right place to develop these activities. We could also use our element 2, which is MEG, which is more commercial oriented, and it requires co-funding from industry. And in some maybe specific cases, we could even go and use our fly element, which is dedicated to demonstrate in orbit technologies. Okay, so with more detail, I just want to bring to your attention that more information will be given to you once the activity is selected. But just to make, you can start making yourself familiar with these two frameworks, because these are the main candidates for implementation of these activities. These are open calls that are permanently open calls in our OSIP channel. In ideas.isa.in, you can look for the RIS scheme or the building block scheme, and there you can even find templates for what is our proposal template, to get yourself also familiar of what we will be asking you in if your activity or your idea is selected to be implemented with us. Same wise, in element 2, we also have a channel open in idea.isa.in, and this is, let's say, another option, maybe less likely to happen, but it's another option for the implementation of our activities. And that's it from my side. Just I give you also an information where you can find additional info on our news, our activities, our achievements, our annual reports, updates, etc. It's in our Shaping the Future website, and this is also a very good site to visit if you have the time. Okay. So now I will give the floor or the screen to my colleague Antonius. He will go in detail these 12 topics that we, let's say, will consider for this call of interest, and I think that's it from my side. Unless you have any question, or Matthew, you want to complete any information.
Yeah, thank you, Noelia. No, I don't have anything to add. If there are questions, yeah, we can take them now, or perhaps we can also move to the specific points.
There is one question in the chat. Are we allowed to share your slides, Noelia, with the participants?
Yes, of course.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, I think we can continue and dive into the space cybersecurity topics. So I give the floor to Antonios Atlasis, who is the head of section for system security engineering, and also Marcus Wallum, operations data systems manager, both from European Space Agency.
Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here with you today. Together with Marcus, we'll present some topics that could be considered for implementation in the GSTP context from you. As already said by Noelia, this list should not be taken in order to constrain you. Quite the contrary, this list should be used just for inspiration purposes only. Which means that you can use something from it, you can elaborate on it, you can be inspired, but also you can propose your own ideas, even if they are not part of this list, or you can propose a follow-up with add-on value, of course, based on previous activities. So again, nothing to constrain you, just to inspire you. Now this is just the list that we'll discuss. I'm not going to read them now because we will discuss one by one. The only thing that I would like to say on this slide is the following. The keyword for any kind of activity, either of this slide or for any other activity that you may propose, is that this should be tailored for space-related missions. I mean that cybersecurity is very generic, and of course cybersecurity also affects space mission. And one activity can have an application in the normal, I would say, IT world, but also on some space missions. So if you propose something, or if you try to implement something from this list, you should always have in mind that this should be tailored for space mission, not for the generic IT world. I will try to make it a bit more specific this one as you go one by one to the subjects. The first one, and probably the most ambitious one, is the definition, but not only, also the implementation of a cyber security reference architecture, or general security reference architecture for space segment, for ground segment, or for both. Of course, this architecture will be based and will build on basic security principles like defense in depth, segmentation, self-protected node, fail security, etc., etc. Again, tailored to the space mission needs, and actually tailored and compliant with relevant architectures which are applicable both to space segment and ground segment, like the EGSCC, for instance, architecture for ground segment, or the general spacecraft avionics architecture. So someone that would like to propose an activity on this topic, for sure should consider the corresponding reference architecture that I mentioned and build on them in terms of security. Regarding threats that should be included, of course, no threat is excluded, and probably one of the first steps should be to identify the potential threats. We would just like to underline to you some threats which are very space mission oriented, like, for instance, the threat of the insider threat or the threat of supply chain attacks. Again, these are not the only ones. We just have the feeling that these are very, very, very relevant for space missions. Now, based or in this activity, some other, let's say, tasks could also be fulfilled, like the definition of a security engineering methodology relevant for the space domain. The bottom line here is that this security reference architecture should be modular, which means that there should be some building blocks. You can imagine some like Legos, I would say. So eventually, depending on the mission you would have, some missions could implement the one, could incorporate some of the modules or leave the other, or vice versa. So this is very important in order to have something which could be suitable for many missions. Before I move on to the next one, is there any question about this? Okay. Of course, there is also opportunity for questions at the end, or even offline if you want to reach us. Now, the second topic is about logging needs in spacecrafts in particular, in order to perform security monitoring. And we are interested in this. It does not mean that we will monitor, or we monitor only spacecrafts. It is just that this is a bit more challenging. For instance, what should be logged, from which modules should be logged, the payloads, and how this log should be protected, for instance, for integrity purposes, how we will verify the authenticity, how all these logs should be aggregated, should be compressed in order to minimize the bandwidth that will be needed to be transferred. What should be the protocols that should be used? In this aspect, of course, priority should be given to space standards like CCSDS protocols or other CSS standards. Now, if we believe that there is a gap, then a proposal could be based on a public standard, which would be preferable than, of course, any proprietary one. Again, the solution should be quite generic for implementation of spacecraft and should be compliant with the previous activity, if we assume that these activities could go somehow together. And in this context, also specificities should be examined, for instance, real-time buses and non-real-time buses. This kind of needs may result in different logging capabilities, or, for instance, different frequencies regarding the log collection. Is there any question about this activity? Okay, I move on to the next one. The next one is the security solution monitoring solution for spacecrafts, but I would say not only, also for ground segment on this one, but going beyond the traditional security monitoring techniques. We are all familiar with security monitoring and how this is implemented in general. One of the challenges that it is usually faced, even on the normal IT world, is to okay, you have some rules and several devices, IDSs, whatever, you have alerts, etc., etc. These are signature-based. You all know the limitations of signature-based, for instance, techniques. So sometimes threat hunting is implemented in order to try to identify potential problems which have escaped from the detection of the conventional mechanisms. In this case, some traffic anomalies could be examined. But again, as I said in the beginning, the keyword is tailored to the space missions. For instance, in our example, is traffic anomalies potentially in TT&C, telemetry and telecommands. Could be using heuristic, could be using some other mechanisms like machine learning. Although I would like to underline here, it's not, for instance, machine learning for the sake of machine learning. We all know that this topic is very trendy, but I would like to see proposals on these topics when we believe that there is really an added value by using, for instance, this kind of techniques. Now, existing tools, of course, should be considered, and extensions to ground segments should also be implemented in order to provide some kind of dedicated security monitoring view. Any question about this activity? Okay. Going to the next one, part of the security monitoring is the cyber threat intelligence. I'm sure you are familiar with this. There are some platforms which integrate feeds, CTI feeds from different sources, can be public, can be commercial, can be open source. Now, the big challenge here is that while there are many feeds available in the market, in the community in general, the feeds which are available for space mission in particular are quite limited. So we would be interested to see if there could be proposed some CTI feeds, could be implemented some of them that could enhance cyber threat intelligence for space missions, again, in particular. We're not talking about just the CTI implementation in general, that I would say it is quite common for IT applications that we know, but again, tailored to space missions. For instance, some CTI feeds provide email addresses, but in space missions, there is no email exchange. So this kind of feeds would be, for our purposes, useless. Some of them provide, for instance, IP addresses, but space missions usually have some kind of, I would say, closed network with no public IP addresses seen. So we're interested in CTI feeds that could be useful for space missions. Any question on this topic? Okay. Again, there will be a chance later. Maybe you need some time to digest this and think about it. And when you have questions later, it's also fine to reach us. We'll be happy to answer any question you may have later. Another potential topic is the design and implementation of a proof of concept of confidential computing, or also sometimes called a secure multi-party computation. Here we talk in principle for protection of data while in use. We know about protection of data while in transit and while at rest. But in this case, we talk about the protection of data while in use. Now, for this particular activity, potentially several solutions could be proposed. And indeed, there are many that could be used. Maybe the first step of such activity could be to make some kind of study of pros and cons of the various approaches that could be used, and then to be proposed and implemented and demonstrated. The one that could be suitable for, again, for space mission, and in particular, either for spacecrafts or even for the ground segments. Assuming that there is no question on this.
I would ask.
Okay, great.
What kind of mission types do you have in mind that secure multi-party computation would be needed in ESA, or do you see it more needed in private space missions?
We don't have in mind particular missions. Actually, you can think this part as a kind of the modules that are described at the beginning of the first task of the general security architecture. So again, this one will be one of the many modules that could be used. Now, for which missions, then it will be on the mission to decide whether this capability would be useful to them or not.
Okay.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Maybe just to add a comment, Antonio, if you don't mind. So one potential use case of this technology is in the SST domain, so the space safety program and the space surveillance and tracking domain, where there can be need, or we have today situations where you have confidential, for example, trajectory data about certain orbital objects, which has to remain confidential, yet you want to perform a multi-party analysis of that trajectory analysis. And that's quite a concrete use case that we've already discussed with some partners, that this could be an interesting solution. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next one is something which is, I guess, familiar to some of you. It's about the design implementation of cybersecurity exercise with scenarios and activities tailored to the space domain. We know that there has been such an activity, but now we'd like to go one step further, which means that I would like to see this exercise to implement, for instance, some protocols based on space standards like CCSDS, and some more realistic representation of spacecrafts, and the whole exercise to be built around this. So to make it more specific and more tailored to the space domain, I would say.
Can I have a question?
Of course.
Who will be the target audience for the exercise? Is it a satellite operator, or is it like some system administrator who has no idea about space missions?
I believe that target audience should be operators whose duty is to perform security monitoring.
And they don't necessarily have experience with space systems.
They should have experience about space system. I mean that
okay.
their job should be to perform security monitoring for space systems.
Okay.
But usually these people do not have the chance to train themselves in cyber exercises which are tailored for space missions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next one is about the definition and implementation of, as we call it, pragmatic and automated risk-based methodology. Now, this one is a bit different from the rest because it does not talk about implementation on spacecraft or on ground segment. It's something which is actually developed and used, I would say, offline, but still should be tailor-based. I will give you an example of what I mean. First of all, the challenge. What is the challenge? You know from the real world that we perform pen tests, vulnerability assessments, we discover CVEs. We may also know the CVEs that are applicable to software, code software we use because of a CyberWatch project we follow. Then we try to prioritize what we will fix. Okay, ideally you need to fix everything, but sometimes it's not possible. So you need to put priorities. Now, based on several scoring methodologies like CVSS, there is some scoring, but the scoring is again based on the unique vulnerability. You don't have an aggregated risk analysis, or when this takes place, it is usually kind of a manual process, which in some cases is not possible because of the number of applicable vulnerabilities. So the whole process needs to be automated. Part of this automation now should be some kind of modeling. What modeling? For instance, again, going back to the architecture stuff, what are the typical assets of space missions, of the ground segment of the spacecraft? What is the typical software used there? And try to model depending on the CVEs which are present in each one of these specific modules. For instance, the same vulnerability will have a different impact on an asset which is used for something simple than for an asset which is used to control of, let's say, the link with the spacecraft. So eventually, the asset where this vulnerability is found, of course, is also important. And because it's not easy to assess automatically all the vulnerabilities for all the assets, especially since not all the missions have exactly the same, I would say, not architecture, but the same definition and development. This is why this kind of modeling is needed. So this activity would aim first to develop a model, potentially using again the architecture discussed before, try to identify the critical assets, etc., and then to propose a way, an automated way, how to translate CVs, for instance, or in general vulnerabilities to risks, to system risk. Now, in this context, some other inputs can be used, like the CWEs or CAPEX, etc., some public inputs, but this is just an example. Is there any question about this? Okay. The next topic, again, it's related with security monitoring. It's a bit more specific. It will contribute to security monitoring. So it's the usage of active defense, and in particular, deception techniques on ground segment. Would not exclude spacecraft, but as a first step, we believe ground segment is probably more realistic. So we don't expect all the techniques necessarily. For instance, some kind of honeypots, etc., may not make, I'm just saying, too much sense for our missions, but some other like honey tokens or honey passwords, or I don't know, honey farts, etc., that could be placed in critical parts of security architecture of ground segment, could be used in a way in order to raise an early warning, a reliable early warning that something goes wrong. Again, I gave a very, very simple example, but presumably this activity will ask for even a bit more sophisticated techniques that, of course, are applicable and can be used in space missions, and in particular on their ground segments. Any question about this? Okay. Now, for the next ones, I will leave the floor to my colleague Marcus to present them. Marcus?
Yep, thanks, Antonios. So this one, design and implementation of secure exchange and accounting mechanisms for the space safety domain. So without going into too much detail, we recently ran an activity with together with GuardTime, in fact, as part of the Estonian incentive scheme. The emerging market, I would say, of commercial sensors and catalog data providers in the SST domain is establishing new needs for tackling the issues of trust and integrity, also availability and automation with regard to the exchange of SST data. Yeah, so as I was saying, we moved away basically from a traditionally US-dominated domain where we were relying upon the US NORAD space track catalog for orbital data, to where we have a European capability, but also a commercial capability. And what this initial study has looked into is the use of distributed ledger technologies to establish a decentralized and trusted data source as a foundation that can also lay the let's say, building blocks for utilizing additional business logic on top, like smart contracts to realize automated exchange between satellite operators or between sensor and catalog data providers. So whilst we build up also capability for collision risk, automated collision risk evaluation systems, this could be part of it to ensure that that those systems and those mitigation initiatives are built upon a really, as I said, secure foundation of decentralized data. Yeah. I don't know if there's any question on this one. Okay, if not, then we go to the next. Okay, CubeSat Hackathon. So this maybe targets the real IOD type activity. It's quite an ambitious one, I would say. but we could start small and think about design before moving into implementation potentially. We're aware, maybe you're also aware of the rising frequency of events like hackathons. These have been quite typical for the terrestrial domain for some time, but it's only in recent years that they've emerged also in the space domain. So I think the highest fidelity exercise so far has been conducted by the US Air and Space Forces, where they had actual satellite hardware in the loop of the hackathon activity, and they invited teams to basically attack the real satellite. This would set the stage for going one step further, where we actually have an in-orbit asset where we do the same exercise. So the activity would cover the execution of, well, first the mission design, so including the design, development, and deployment of an architecture, which could provide the basis of this IOD, let's say, hackathon service. And that should consist of a multi-layered defense in depth approach, so that you could gradually, let's say, peel off protection mechanisms and test those protection mechanisms to the teams who are participating. So, for example, having captured the flag at these various layers to test the defense in depth. And this last point here is just to mention that it should not really be a point-to-point simple architecture, because that is, let's say, relatively easy to lock down. But we could be more ambitious and go for a more distributed architecture where you may have multiple operations centers, or let's say shared payload, or some sort of architecture which is similar to that of OPSAT, so an actual in-orbit demonstration flying laboratory. Some of you may be aware of OPSAT, but it basically has a scheme where you can have external experimenters run their own control system through your infrastructure and directly control the spacecraft and all of its onboard instruments. And the FDIR concept, which is implemented on that, ensures that you have spacecraft safety, but it still allows those external experimenters to do whatever they want with the instruments. And a similar concept could be thought for from a security perspective. So the CubeSat could then be, and the FDIR concept could then be, for example, resistant to successful cyber attacks. Is there any question on this one? Okay, if not, next slide, please, Antonios. Okay, security architecture for federated operations. So, yeah, as mentioned here, so the concept of federated operations can take a number of forms, let's say. So we've recently been looking into multi-center, multi-asset federated operations, where you may have multiple operation centers, potentially run by multiple different agencies or commercial partners or other partners, and they would be operating, for example, different assets in a system of systems, or they could be responsible for a particular instrument or payload on a separately operated platform. And today, what we have mainly is kind of peer-to-peer, point-to-point communication, a central commanding authority for the responsibility of that asset. You have interfaces based on point-to-point file exchange and symmetric key infrastructures. And where we could go in the future is a more federated, distributed architecture where, as I said, you could have multiple participants, multiple operators. And from a security perspective, that brings in, of course, a number of challenges in terms of a reliable, for example, PKI architecture behind, or federated identity, cross-certification mechanisms. We see in some standardization bodies now, in CCSDS, for example, the emergence of new standards that is going to try to establish such a certificate authority, multi-agency, member state agency for that certificate management and identity management. And it's how we can actually adapt an existing ground segment architecture towards that model to tackle also these resulting security challenges. Is there any question on this one? Okay, moving on to the zero trust topic. So at least as far as I'm aware, zero trust has been a bit of a buzzword up to maybe recently, where it's become a little bit more agreed and standardized as to what we mean when we say zero trust. So it's really about moving away from the very currently widespread and traditional design pattern of network perimeter defense. So relying mainly on firewalls, maybe DMZs, but network level security controls, and then having, let's say, a rather softer center in terms of authentication between assets within the network. So probably most of you are aware, but zero trust assumes that there is no implicit trust granted to assets or user accounts based solely on their network location. So rather, we're moving away towards where that trust is at the individual asset or individual service. So it could be a combination of user or application or device that can access particular data to the exclusion of other subjects. So a much more granular role-based access control at that level, which today is something we typically don't have in the ground segment, and the impact of that on the ground segment software systems would be quite significant if you had to adapt your software at the, let's say, subcomponent and control system level. So this would be to really look at what the implications would be of adopting a zero trust model for a typical ground segment, to design those critical functions and then verify maybe parts of them in existing infrastructure products. Maybe just say this is particularly relevant when we start talking about another initiative that we have, which is to move towards multi-mission ground segment software architectures. So where resources are shared across missions, and you need granular access control based, again, not on network segmentation, but at the level of resources and services which are provided by that multi-mission infrastructure to individual missions. So is there any question on that one?
Hello, Umesh here. Is there an existing standard we could base the zero trust model upon, please?
I don't know if there is a standard in terms of an actual architecture. I know there has been recent publications from people like NIST, but it's more at a special publication level rather than any, let's say, standardized architecture, as far as I'm aware. But I may be missing some inputs there.
And what TRL level are we aiming for this implementation?
I think as GSTP, we'd want to have the critical functions verified in a at least semi-realistic laboratory environment, let's say. So this is why the last bullet is relevant, because we would probably take existing infrastructure software systems, implement those functions, and do some verification.
Thank you.
Yeah. So around TRL 5, 6, maybe.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that was all for me. Thanks very much for listening. And yeah, if there's any follow-on questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact.
Thank you, Marcos.
Thank you, both of you, especially for also defining these topics for Estonian entities and for introducing them as well. Are there any other questions?
Seem to be muted. Hi, just to ask this out loud, is this TRL aspect relevant to all of these activities? So TRL 5 to 6, or does it differ between these topics?
Yeah, so GSTP can cover topics that's, say, from a program point of view, typically we can start at about TRL 3. And of course, we try to aim to go all the way up to 9. Now, in these projects you're proposing, or okay, in this case, I would consider an IOD as something like TRL 8. In the two options that were indicated, one, technology developments, they could be anywhere in the range of, say, TRL 3, so something that's software is always a bit difficult, or I would say software-based systems, I have to admit, it's always difficult to apply a TRL scale, I admit. But something that is where we show a functional concept that it could work, but now we have to start applying it to space. So we might have a functional concept that could work, but now we need to apply it to the space context. So here we have and that could be either the space segment or the ground segment of space, of course. So TRL 3 up to TRL 6, okay? And the idea is that we are seeking, indeed, there could be a first step to achieve a certain maturity level, and then with a follow-on step eventually to achieve some type of demonstration. As Paul Elias mentioned, he would like to target eventually some type of in-orbit or demonstration, or if we can do some type of demonstration, it doesn't necessarily have to be in orbit, but something that really can demonstrate the concept. So yeah, the range is quite wide, and then on certain topics, of course, with Antonios and Marcus, it really depends on the state of the art that exists today, of course, where we're starting from. So if you guys would like to compliment Antonios and Marcos or Noelia, also please go ahead.
I mean, I would echo what you say, Matthew, and I think there may be a range across these topics, and considering how far you want to go, and also let's say the budget envelopes, if you go for the individual activities rather than the IOD, it may be something that would have to be phased. So I think it depends.
And some of them that are like the cyber defense exercise or the hackathon could be to the highest level, right?
Yes, absolutely. I think that we would try to aim to gather. It depends on what the people propose, but if we need to do some preparatory activity first, we could consider it. But indeed, we'd like to be able to demonstrate to the highest fidelity, or the highest fidelity to the space context, some type of exercise, such that it can be demonstrated and then perhaps used in another context, in another space context. Yes.
Yeah, from the Estonian side, I can comment that we prefer not to have studies, so the higher the better. But I see Marika from Guard Time has a question.
Thank you, Karoli. It was briefly mentioned earlier that under certain circumstances also external partners could be considered. I mean, by external, I mean entities outside Estonia. Is this the case, and what are the terms and conditions for that? Thank you.
Okay, at least so in the broader context in GSDP, we would ask in general for a technology development activity that if, for instance, you have a partner in another country, let's just take Finland, for example, that country would be willing to support that company in the context of the projects. So this is the baseline of how GSDP is run. And I think in this particular call, but Karoli, I think you are open to this concept of cooperation, right? So yes. In special, yeah, okay, perfect. Okay. In special cases, it might be possible if there's a technology that is being procured, or like something that is off the shelf and or quasi off the shelf, and then it must be procured in another country. On an exceptional basis, this could be covered within the Estonian contribution, but it's something that we would have to discuss with the delegation, because it should bring extreme added value, and it'd be worth it for the country to cover that cost. So one, on a base level, we would expect the other country to cover it, and on an exceptional basis, we would discuss with the delegation if there are specific contributions that really bring value and then make it worth it. Okay.
Any other questions?
Karoli, can I have one more question, please?
Go ahead.
You said at the beginning that the bilaterals are supposed to take place during July, September. What is the expected timeline from that onwards?
Hello. So it really depends on let's say, the agility of the companies, and from our side, if let's say we discuss an activity with you, we have a bilateral early, still in, for example, in July, early in August, and we decide, okay, this is a candidate to go ahead, we will invite you to, for example, send the proposal in one of our OSIP channels, and we will start the procurement. So for those activities that we are running in the RIS and in the building block scheme, you can have a contract since we give the green light in around 4 months time, or even earlier. Okay. If we consider maybe other scheme like the work plan, then we will have to go to IPC, but I don't see this as a potential, okay, I see very unlikely. And if it's an in-orbit demonstration exercise that requires a bigger budget, and we will have to consider the activity more in detail, it could take a bit longer. But this is the time frame that I consider. So we could have a still contract within this year, and in activities that, yeah, if we select them, and if we have a quite, I don't know, targeted activity, we consider that this is the right direction, and you give us then an outline proposal with by far more details, which is on the second step. We can have the first contracts by the end of this year.
Thank you.
One last thing, if I may. It's something that we have said many times and we have underlined, but I would like to repeat it. Again, this list was not given to you in order to limit you. It was given as an inspiration. Please think also outside of this list, and if you have a nice idea, cybersecurity related, which of course is applicable to space missions, it has to be space oriented. I would be very keen to hear it.
Any more questions or comments?
Hello, can I ask a question? I'm interested, how long can the project be? Is it preferred 1 year and up to 2 years projects?
So what I would like is that it makes sense. So that the scope is in line somehow with the budget that you propose and with the duration. So of course, for this type of development, what we have seen or our experience is in the order of 1 to 2 years max. But I think this is a range. But I don't know, if you have a proposal and you think you can do it in 6 months, I'm willing to look at it. Also, if it takes longer, we are also going to look at it, and we can discuss together later. But what I want is you to think about what are you going to do? What do you think the time is going to take to reach to your deliverable at the end of the day? So you have to think about your resources. You have to think about the effort that it will require. If you are going to have some hardware, yeah, if you need to procure something. So all these aspects. So this is for you to say, but our experience is that these activities could be in the order of 18, 24 months, and in some the smaller activities could be up to 9 months, 12 months. Okay.
Thank you.
Last chance for questions or comments. Okay. Then I would like to thank all the speakers and all the participants, and we look forward to receiving your expressions of interest via email to cosmos@eas.ee by the 7th of July. And I have linked the information in the chat as well, and I will add the slides there on the same page. But feel free to be in contact, and a really big thank you to everybody once again.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you all. Have a nice
Bye.
afternoon.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.